Yeah, I was waiting for the other one. All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to this conversation between those of us in the Econophysics server right now, and Ian Wright, who has graciously agreed to join us today for some dialogue on his works and what he's done and what he's working on and so forth. Just shooting the shit.
Hi everyone, pleased to meet you all. Looking forward to a chat.
Yeah, definitely. So, if you want to back up real quick and just kind of give an overview of where you're at and your thinking with respect to, you've got these essays on capital as a real god. Not just arguing from a metaphorical standpoint, how we view these systems, but also in a real sense of capital as this sort of uh, like interfirm control system. The suprafirm control system has its own primitive cognition and has its own goals and so forth that are not coupled to human goals, or rather to those of the humans who comprise it, and its suppliers and its customers and all that, everyone who it affects.
Yeah. So, a point was made before the recording began, which was a good point, which was many people can accept that corporations are semi-autonomous from the individuals that comprise them, and that they have their own internal logic, for-profit motive, and these human institutions, of which a corporation is an example, can have quasi-autonomy from individuals. And many people can readily accept that. There are people who are hardcore methodological individualists who think there's no such thing as society and there's only really just individuals, and any ontology above and beyond that is unnecessary, is fiction. But that's an incorrect view, but it's also, I think, a minority view. So yeah, many people can accept that. But the important point about the capital as a real god and the dark Eucharist of the real god essays is that they claim more than that. First of all, firms are just one kind of human institution that is subject to capital. And capital is suprafirm. It's the logic of capitalist society as a whole. The claim is in those essays is that the capital instantiates a kind of control system which is quasi-independent of the individuals that comprise it, but importantly, it instantiates what I tend to call objective semantics, in that it has a very primitive kind of intentionality, that it has its own representations, that, for instance, money, value, it has its own representations which it manipulates, and it has belief-like states and goal-like states and sensory-like states, and its control object, the thing that it controls, is us, and that the semantics of those states are independent of our individual cognition, but they are dependent on our social practices. I think that's a specifically Marxist point, maybe said in a different way, but just to say it in a different way, the claim is that capital is an intentional entity, and that regardless of our consciousness and what we may think about the economic system, what we may think about capital, is objectively it has its own semantics and goals, and is a fully fledged intentional entity in that sense, albeit of a simple kind compared to, say, human cognition, very simple kind, but on the other hand of a gigantic kind, because it actually organizes almost everything in the world. That, the claim, is something that people, it goes beyond just cybernetic management and emergence of new ontologies due to human organization. It goes beyond that, And in a sense, it's a conclusion. And I've been spending a lot of time recently to give the logical and rational scientific basis for that conclusion, because it's such a surprising and counterintuitive claim.
I think another kind of aspect of the answer to that question of like, my original question there was, and you might have something to add about this too, is, when people accept that these companies are like autonomous, that they're, that they do act independently of human will to some extent. I think the reason that some people can accept that is precisely due to like a mystification of the origin of profit, which is another thing that you have obviously put a lot of work into with your work on the transformation problem and stuff. I think they tend to wish kind of wish cast a little bit about the efficacy of the system, because okay, well, all the companies need to do is profit, right? So then if that's all they need to do, then there's creative ways that CEOs can address that, and they can but that allows them to sort of, I guess, like avoid thinking about overall behaviors of a simplistic system like the overall system of capital that you're talking about. So I think maybe there's a connection there between this what you're trying to pitch here, and also the people's lack of understanding of the origin of profit. What do you think about that?
I mean, they're obviously connected. But I think even before people start reflecting on the origin of profit, there is it's kind of like an issue in the philosophy of mind, right? Where it's debated a great deal, which is a naturalistic theory of intention, and whether that is possible, and whether the existing naturalistic theories of intention are successful. So, for example, there's if you take someone like Daniel Dennett, and this in philosophy of mind, they typically talk about human cognition or animal cognition. They much less and more rarely talk about whether there could be cognition that emerges from collective human behavior. But if you take someone like Daniel Dennett, who proposes an intentional stance, he says something along these lines, which is robots and animals, we're not sure whether they have internal cognition or not. But in order to interact with them, we need a theory, and that theory is taking an intentional stance towards them, which we assume as if they have intentions, that they have goals, that they represent things in the environment, and so on and so forth. Now, that's all well and good. It's very behavioristic. It's very empirical, and I think it's not really sufficient, because we don't simply have to look at external behavior to ascribe intentionality, particularly as intentionality arises not just from behavior, but from the internal architecture of the cognizing entity. And once you start stepping into different kinds of internals of cognizing entities, you begin to tease apart what properties are needed for intentionality to arise. And then you kind of have a naturalistic theory of intentionality. But many of those theories that have been proposed in the philosophy of mind haven't been hugely successful because they have various flaws. So so there's two kind of problems for me. One is that I can't simply draw on the existing naturalistic theories of intentionality to apply it to a supra-individual control system, that is capital. I have to actually do some work in the theory of intentionality before I can even do that, in order to justify the claim that capital as a control system instantiates objective semantics and is an intentional entity, quasi-independent from our consciousness. So profit, yes, that's a problem, but even before then, there is an argument to be made in order to justify the conclusions I come to in those Capital as a Real God essays.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one way that I've found personally to describe what's going on is basically in a language of what social logic. So a social logic is basically a set of learned procedures to execute, systems to build and maintain, etc. That just by sheer trial and error at the level of like, okay, we don't, there are so many ways to make a buck that at some level we just don't care about that particular detail, But what we can say is that the requirement that a firm reproduce itself through its money flows induces a of trial and error approach at the level of everyone involved in production and distribution to figure out ways of maximizing profit. Just trying stuff out, keeping strategic secrets from each other, and all that.
Yeah, it's a condition of it's like a survival condition under the logic of capital. If firms aren't successful at making profits, they'll eventually die out. So there's as you mentioned, there's a trial and error process with a very strong selective function on that trial and error. And so due to the social relations of our society, the social structures that we find ourselves participating in, we are subject to all kinds of constraints and direction and control, which makes us act in certain ways, and that's kind of obvious. There's nothing new. That's when Marx talks about character masks, what he's really saying is, in particular kinds of societies, there's particular kinds of social roles. They're placeholders. There are workers, there are capitalists, there are landlords, and these social structures we participate in, and we become those characters in this particular play. And firms, yep, they have to be for-profit corporations. They have to maximize their profits. They have to minimize their wages, do all kinds of things if they're going to play this game. Yeah, that's kind of obvious, I guess. Well, maybe obvious to Marxists. I don't know about other people, but yeah.
So I think one of the follow-up things from that I've kind of derived from my conversations with Victor Yakovenko is that some of the how in physics you have symmetries, like for instance you have translational symmetry, and this induces conservation of linear momentum and vice versa, etc. for like rotational invariance of your physics equations and conservation of angular momentum, invariance of your equations of physics over time, and energy conservation, phase and charge, other things like that. And these all come from Noether's theorem. And we have a similar thing in society where you have but it's similar up to a point that we can actually choose our physics, because the physics of our society derive, in part at least, from the symmetries that we impart upon our social technologies. These are technologies that have this sort of social dimension to them, and and they have this dual character to them in the way that you talk about in your videos and so forth, and on your blog. And this social character of the technologies that we develop behave in ways that are subject to the symmetries that we either intentionally or accidentally place upon them. The prime example here being the symmetries that we use in our accounting technologies, and these induce certain laws of motion in markets. And so I was wondering what your thoughts are on that and how that ties into your analysis of capital as this superstructural controller.
Yeah. Well, it's very obvious when you start doing any kind of serious economic modeling that and you apply mathematics that conservation laws, symmetry, they pop up. It's unavoidable because in a way, conservation laws and symmetries are basically very general ways of compressing causality. So it's no surprise that that should pop up in social systems. But more specifically, when you talk about accounting, double entry bookkeeping, that's a conservation law right there. Yes, I think it's wrong though to say that we create the physics, that we impose the physics, the social physics, that is. I mean, I don't think that's what you precisely meant, because we're not completely free to invent our social relations of productions. We're not entirely free to invent our social structures from a blank page, and that's because there is a tethering. I wouldn't say like a strong causal connection, but there's a tethering between our social structures and the more basic and fundamental material need to reproduce society over time, to be successful, flourishing human societies that persist over time. And that's obviously, as I'm sure you know, a basic point from historical materialism. And so the social structures that we are born into and participate in aren't entirely irrational inventions of the past. They all have elements of rationality in them. They're a mixture of rationality and irrationality. So the space of possible social structures we could successfully participate in is constrained by these more fundamental sort of material physics of social reproducibility, producing enough stuff, distributing it, etc. The space of possible social structures is constrained by that, but it's not selected by that. And then within that space, we have much more freedom than we realize. And so as individuals, I mean, this is the point of social science, this is the point of Marxist social science, of Marxism, is to notice the social structures that we've inherited, to critique them and see what's wrong with them, and then try and change them. But they have to still be those within that set of possible social structures.
Right. In the same way that you have a set of possible buildings that you can construct. Like, you can construct all kinds of different buildings that do different things and are laid out in different ways, but it ultimately is constrained by like the tensile strength of steel or what have you. Yeah, I think that. Yeah.
Exactly. You said it much quicker than I did. So that's much better. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think that's one of the key points that we can really hammer on, that we can be engineers. We can take an engineering mindset. Maybe that's dangerous and dumb in many cases, but we can take that mindset towards, can we decide on smarter ways to, get, or rather, can we decide on smarter laws of motion in our social systems in some cases? Because a large result of all of this thinking from the classicals onwards, hopefully to us if we're on the right track, is that, and both Alex, your work points this out, and Ian, your work points this out, and it's pointed out in different ways, is that the society is not, the mechanics of society are not determined by people. Like the whole great man notion of how the world works is just completely backwards and wrong. And I think we're finding more ways to quantify that now.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Again, and by the way, this is like, again, the way I do it here is it's just casual and open, so just feel free to hop in whenever, because
Yeah,
I tend to go on rabbit holes and stuff.
I have a kind of a related question. This is kind of something. So specifically in in your Dark Eucharist or the Real God video, it's not so much the Dark Eucharist thing, but I don't know if you'd agree with this conception, but it seems like you pitched there a materialist theory of magic to some extent, or real magic rather, that kind of lives rent free in my head all the time. And in particular, you have this distinction that's very interesting to me between uh, holy magic and occult magic, right? Where holy magic is essentially the type of magic in which it's directly acknowledged by society as something that exists and is real and is confronted and is kind of more honest, I guess, in that sense. And then, of course, and your principal example of that is Christianity. And then you have occult magic, which are the egregores that are accidentally released into the world, essentially the ones that humans that people aren't aware of, that does control that does have real effects, and in some cases control behavior. And your principal example of that is capital, right? The real god of capital is an occult god in the sense that you say that you mention how the job of the economist is to effectively convince people that it's not real, that this is just these are objective laws of reality, and we just need to accept them. That capitalism is what it is. And I guess I think that that's a really important conception to try to frame, because the only way that it seems to me like the contradiction in my head, the dialectical contradiction is that on the one hand, we need to confront this occult magic in order to break free of it, right? This notion of capitalism is a rational system that people are just freely participating in, that isn't controlling them, and is the conventional narratives and so forth, that this is a religious system of beliefs that we need to acknowledge as occult magic in order to break away from. But then, one of the main rules of magic that you state in that video is that the more aware we are of how magic actually works, the harder it is to do magic. And so it almost seems to me like, that's a like, we need to be aware of magic in order to kind of deal with it, or deal with occult magic. But then in the sense of the socialist project as a project of kind of replacing it with even stronger magic, it seems like we're losing our ability to do that. So that's kind of something I struggle with a lot, is like, to what extent do you see the destruction of capitalism, or the replacement of capitalism with something new, as that project, and of casting a more magic, I guess. And like, I don't know, I don't really know how to like word the question any more than that, but I'm curious, like, what you think about that. I think I've asked you this in private too a couple of times, given answers there, but I still think about it a lot.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that, because I also think it's important, very important point that is really just adumbrated in a few paragraphs, right? But I'm trying to extend that into a larger and more compelling argument, and that's actually quite a lot of work. So I did a talk on the history of possession, and I did a talk on what are gods, and those are two forays into trying to extend this argument and go deeper into it. So one of the points I make in the Dark Eucharist essay, it's quite brief, so maybe, yeah, anyway, one of the important distinctions I make, and it's nothing particularly novel. Well, one part I would say is perhaps novel. Obviously, stage magic is where it's a social structure which people participate in, where everyone knows that what they're seeing is a trick. that it isn't real. Okay. Whereas Aleister Crowley style magic or religious magic, for example, going to an occult ceremony, be that a minority one or a majority one like the actual Christian Eucharist. The point there is that that's a social structure where people believe magic is happening, but that they also believe it isn't a trick.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really real. And the power of magic is more powerful when people really believe it to be true. And the more counterintuitive and against normal reality magic appears to be, the bigger and grander the claims. So, for example, when you participate in the Eucharist, Christ is present. Now, theologians argue a great deal about precisely what that means. There's different points of view, but Christ is present in some sense. That's pretty remarkable and startling claim, right? And if you really believe that, as many Catholics do, then during the ceremony of the Eucharist, sometimes people will be elevated to incredible mental states because they believe it to be the case. That is the power of magic. And this is slightly an aside, but kind of an important one. And I won't be able to fully lay it all out because it's work in progress. But I honestly think that our default state as human beings, because we're cooperative animals, is to be in some kind of state of possession. Where I'm trying to use the word possession in a deflated kind of way to include not just highly elevated states of possession by, say, demons or what have you, but also possession in the sense you're possessed by a social role. Just the simple fact of being a worker, simple fact of being a capitalist owner of a firm. You are possessed by the rules of that social structure. There are certain things you should and should not do. There are norms to follow. And my proposition is that that is the default state of human beings. We're always participating in multiple social structures at any one time, and also taking on multiple social roles at any one time. And we're playing those roles. We are acting out those roles. And
it almost sounds like the Althusarian notion of like interpolation. It almost kind of sounds like that.
It could well be. I read Althusser decades ago, so I've kind of forgotten what that actually means. So maybe you could tell me.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, my understanding of it, and I only understand this from like third-hand sources or second-hand sources, is like, when you are, the way that you learn and the way that you are conditioned to act is sort of, instantiated on you by society, expecting something of you. Basically, I think that you are a worker. You see how other workers act. You see how other workers are supposed to think, and then that is kind of a core part of your learning process that kind of turns you into a role, I guess. I might.
Yeah, we're doing it all the time. So there's there's 5 people in this conversation. We're participating in the social practice of a Discord conversation. We may not be fully aware of it, but we're already following various norms of that social structure. For example, if I put my camera on and started singing to you all, that would be odd. And you wouldn't like it. It's the wrong thing to do because we're all playing this role now, right? And that's completely normal. It's fine. Now, in the cases of magic, you may be playing the role of initiate or acolyte or part of the flock, attending church. And depending on the belief systems associated with those roles, you get put into various different mental states. We're all sober now. This is completely normal reality. Nothing remarkable is happening whatsoever. But in other situations, playing roles would put us into very elevated mental states. Now, you asked the question about whether we need more powerful magic to replace our possession, our universal possession by capital. And I think the answer is no, because I think the point of a communist revolution, not as an event but as a process, the point of it is to aspire to knowledge and transparency about how we participate in the social being. In other words, we need to understand what magic was and how it once affected us. We need to understand what capital was and how it once affected us, and then see that we in fact are social animals that participate in social structures that we can partly invent ourselves to suit us and change. And at that point, the level of deep mystification that we all live under should hopefully, to use the phrase, wither away. And the point of the Real God essays is to try and break through the arrogance, or rather the arrogance of capitalist ideology that was basically, created with the emergence of capitalism over the last few hundred years, is to think that we're already free of religion, that we're already free of possession and mystification. But I would say that that's false. In other words, I totally disagree with the Weberian idea that there was a disenchantment when capitalism arose. I think the opposite's the case. There was a new kind of enchantment. I've used the phrase dark enchantment elsewhere. Dark in the sense that we all became enchanted with a new god, or rather an existing god became the god, the most powerful god. But we didn't acknowledge that. We didn't realize that. We thought it was a secular kind of revolution. And that, I think, is false. It's one of the biggest myths of capitalist society. In other words, we're still living in the dark ages in that sense.
So, like, I agree with that, but I also kind of feel like there was a success to some extent of that. There was some disenchantment at the same time that there was like a re-enchantment of this instantiation of this like new occult religion as Christianity was kind of fading in Europe. Like, to an extent, it kind of seems to me like, intelligent, like not intelligent, like rational, the rational modern thinking of like, scientific inquiry and things like that sort of amount to a disenchantment of some sort, while at the same time you also still have like an economic re-enchantment or a lack of ability for that scientific inquiry to enter into the new stuff. So
I'd like to jump in here and kind of mention this work that you did is also stuck in my mind a lot. And I've thought of a few ways to extend this, and one of those ways is to distinguish between cosmic religion and social religion, where we have, when we believe in God, the gods of the old times descended from deistic entities that revolve around natural events like the wind and volcanoes and meteors and stuff, and the sun. And as we became disenchanted by that kind of, I wouldn't say that there's any sort of causality here necessarily, but I think it's an interesting connection that we have a dominance of social religion, as opposed to cosmic religion that has persisted up until now. Maybe you could.
That's fair. There's a again, this is sweeping generalizations, and that's why it will take a lot of work to dot the I's and cross the T's on this argument. But if you look at the mechanical materialism that arose at the beginnings of the emergence of capitalism, it seems to be the case that these natural philosophers were deeply anti-animistic. If you think of Descartes and his kind of mechanical materialism, the religious, so they kept the soul, but it was shrinking, so to speak. And the idea that there was animating souls in all kinds of things, traditional animism, was suspect and to be thrown out entirely. I think something happened there where the baby was thrown out with the bathwater, because that was really also the beginning of the problem of in the philosophy mind of naturalizing intentionality. Because as soon as you see everything as a sort of simple linear cause and effect mechanical machines, which is not entirely wrong, by the way, but if you view it only in those terms, then interiority and cognition suddenly becomes difficult to explain. And in a way, we're still living with that legacy, and that's the problems I mentioned in the philosophy of mind that persist to this day. And one of the things that I think Marx pointed to, and maybe didn't fully explicate, was a return to bringing animism back to social structures that, in a sense, animate us. That there is, as I mentioned, a supra-individual entity with intentionality, or that controls us, and that isn't animism in the old sense, because we can now give naturalistic accounts of such entities, entirely in terms of cause and effect and material properties. But that was something that was thrown away. So it became hard to imagine that there would be the possibility of a of a new social religion with a new kind of God that was hidden from us. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I guess I didn't really I kind of forgot where I was going with that question originally, but like,
Yeah, sorry about that.
said that no, I mean, it was my fault. My memory don't work good, but I was kind of thinking about like how, you said you're kind of pitching it and saying, the transition to communism will involve like a dispelling of this old god, and kind of a discarding of religion in favor of like a new kind of or like the completion of like kind of the rational process of the Enlightenment that was kind of stunted. But it seems to me like, there's going to have to also be some kind of almost religious belief in like a new kind of human project that was implicit to a transition to a new mode of production, like a new belief system in terms of like, well, I don't even know. There's a huge kind of umbrella of things there, but it seems like there will need to be some kind of new. I don't want it's not good to call them religious beliefs, but belief in line of like what humans are and what they're supposed to be doing with each other, how they're supposed to be engaging with each other, that replaces or abolishes, or alpha bungs or whatever the word is, the old thing. And to that extent, isn't that a new spell, a new holy spell?
Yes and no. I agree with you. We do need that new thing. It would probably be incorrect to call it a religion or a spell, because because again, it's not that mechanical materialism is entirely irrational, and it's not that ancient animism, is entirely irrational.
Mhm.
Not at all. There's a great deal of rationality to it. I mean, you could see ancient animism where all the powers, the natural powers of the world, the lightning, the growing of the trees, the movements of the moon and the stars,
Those things are all empirically motivated, right? It's kind of
absolutely,
yeah.
they're taking the intentional stance, completely reasonable given the state of knowledge. So, so this transition to getting rid of the real God that is capital, becoming more knowledgeable and conscious of the social structures that we create and participate in, would be progress, would be a step forward, but it wouldn't be a radical departure from what's gone. It's just it's an improvement. It's a better understanding of the truth of what we are as a social species and how to live with each other. So you could call it, would it be a new religion? Well, it'd be a new story, it'd be a new framing of what we humans, as you said, want to do and aspire to. What's the point? It would be a story for us to organize our lives around as a collective, for sure. But presumably it would more truthfully grasp the nature of ourselves, the world, and our society than what's gone before. So there's continuity and discontinuity. I'm not one of the I don't subscribe to the paradigm shifts account of progress in knowledge. To me, there's always continuity, right?
I guess kind of fluidly, like, you can say that it's not entirely accurate to say that it's a new religion, but it also is what it is it's kind of the evolution of religion. It's religion. What religion is changing as we develop,
Yeah,
and
because I mean,
evolve past the problems of it.
yeah, because I mean, a lot of religious books, and I don't really read them, so excuse my ignorance here. But like the Bible is not only about all these incredible things happening, but it's also like rules for living, very basic, day-to-day rules for living. The Quran is full of day-to-day rules for living, rules that presumably those people thought were good for the community as a whole, to make it strong and survive over time. And communism will have similar norms and rules and aspirations about what it is to lead a good life. It couldn't be otherwise, I don't think.
Yeah, and this is expressed most strongly through the legal system involved, whatever that is, because that is ultimately sort of the playwright of society in a certain sense. And so the way I think about it isn't that we're like, enchanting in a new way or disenchanting. It's we're in addition to what you were talking about with getting a more holistic view on how, who we are, what our society is like, how we interact with it, and how we can change it. We're also assuming the role of godhood in this sense. Or maybe as like a meta god, perhaps, if for lack of a better term, where instead of our social logics controlling us and chanting us, it not instead of, but in addition to that happening, we also are controlling what the quantities are from which we derive our social logic. And
Right. Yes.
we define those through whatever measurement processes we use for in-kind accounting or what have you.
Yeah, so at the moment we're in a way entirely, well, we're disempowered because we're not in control.
Yeah.
Something else is in control, and the idea of Marxism is that one of the aims of a revolution is to give us a lot more control over how our society operates, to give us conscious control. That's one of the the points, and therefore become empowered. And I also want to, I'm sure you all agree with this, but I also want to remind everyone about the importance of the individual here, right? So there's a need to create social structures that allow a more complete flourishing of the individual, independently of the necessities imposed by society and the necessities imposed by social reproduction. So again, I think everyone already knows this, but with with greater productivity and a greater surplus and greater democratic control over our working time, then we would be empowered to have more, in quotes, free time. That is time to pursue our individual projects or not, as we see fit. So there would be essentially not just a small number of masks or roles that we could play. There'd be a great flowering of an enormous number of roles that we could play, and we could invent our own. I mean, that's what I think that's part of the story of what we're aiming for.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it, I think. So I want to now, if there's no other question that I cut off by accident, right? I wanted to now, I want to get into my ideas that build upon this whole framework of analysis. But before we do that, I want to ask both of you a question, since you're both here. And I did a Control F in your paper text, and I found 7 instances of this. And I've heard Ian say it a couple times here. Dialectics. What is dialectics to you?
Oh no. I'll let Ian go first.
Have I used dialectics in my?
Yeah. I think you dropped dialectical at some point so far. If not,
Yeah.
well,
I can try actually.
okay.
I mean, I see when I use the word dialectical, I think it's most often used with respect to like unobserved kind of dialectical contradiction, which is not like a mathematical contradiction. And this is kind of somewhat informed by like I think your stuff, Ian, on Hegelian contradiction. But like when I say dialectical contradiction, I'm referring to kind of these two observations that have been made, or two processes in motion, maybe also in real life, that through their interaction with each other, something is going to happen that is new, right? That there's a kind of tension between them from which something else must necessarily arise as an effect. That's usually what I'm referring to when I say dialectics.
Right, that's very helpful. Yes, yes. So let's distinguish between dialectical materialism and dialectical contradiction, which is dialectical contradiction is a more specific thing. And there, is your name Tex, by the way? Is that the right way to?
My name's Alex, but
Alex,
yeah.
Alex. Yeah. So Alex, yes, I agree with you. Dialectical contradiction is sometimes I call it a real contradiction, which is the simple deflating example is a game of tug of war. The two teams are fighting against each other, and the emergent phenomena is the moving of the rope back and forth until it's resolved in one way or another.
So it's basically fighting over a constraint.
Yeah, each pole of the dialectical contradiction, team A or team B, have contradictory goals. One wants to move it to the left, the other one wants to move it to the right, and what emerges is movement, is change, and so that should be very straightforward, really. But the topic of dialectical materialism obviously is a much bigger one, and that's, as everyone knows, refers to a particular theoretical tradition, and which I think is very rich and fruitful. The only problem is that in my view, a lot of the work in that tradition, especially in the 20th century, because there's less excuse for it in the 20th century, is unfortunately all kind of textual exegesis and doesn't fully or sufficiently engage with modern dynamics, with mathematics and computational modeling, because I see absolutely no, quotes, contradiction between the tradition of dialectical materialism and modern scientific approaches at all. I see them entirely complementary. If anything, the modern stuff is an elaboration of the ideas of dialectical materialism. I'm thinking of dynamic systems theory, control theory. So for me, dialectical materialism is science in the broadest sense, and if I want to like really squeeze and compress it down to a slogan, to me, computation precisely is logic in motion, and I see very strong links between computational science and dialectical materialism.
Makes sense. And then, Alex, did you have anything else to add to that?
I did, and I'm like trying to like organize it right now. But like, yeah, I do agree with Ian that like there's no contradiction between modern science and dialectical thinking, and I think it was David Harvey who originally put this idea in my head, but he said something along the lines of like that dialectical thinking, and again, this isn't dialectical materialism, but dialectical thinking is something that's actually easier for children to do than for adults sometimes, because as adults, we're trained to try to think in terms of like these rigid kinds of formal systems almost. Whereas I feel like dialectical materialism enters into science when it's like, okay, I make the formal model, but then there's contradiction. There's disparities between the formal model and real life, and then you have to ask, well, what is missing? And then you kind of that leads you somewhere new in like a process of scientific inquiry. And I think that is kind of where those two things intersect. And I don't know what I feel like after I fully kind of started. After I finished kind of reading Marx and reading some of these other early thinkers, I feel like I'm much better now at being able to think dialectically, or at least I find myself doing so, in the sense of like, I have an observation, I have something in my head, and then there's something else that I notice in my head that has a tension with it, and that leads you places, I guess. So that's all I really think to add to what Ian was putting there.
Yeah, that's suggested something that I'd like to say too, which is so as I said, dialectical materialism is very rich and fruitful, and there are some contrasts with more modern philosophies where dialectical materialism is, in a sense, more sophisticated. So if you think about analytical philosophy, I'm thinking now of say the 20th century ordinary language philosophers like Ryle and Wittgenstein, people like that, who did a lot of conceptual analysis. So a lot of the philosophical problems, they would say, are due to inadequacies of our concepts, or our lack of understanding of the full ramifications of the concepts we use. And if we analyze our concepts properly, then we'll see that many of the questions and conundrums that philosophically pop up are no such thing at all. They're just due to our own confusions about our language. Now, that's actually very important. It's very useful to have that point of view and adopt that methodology. But they kind of stop there, and they ends up being like an immanent critique of our current conceptual structures. But in contrast, dialectical materialism has a much more sophisticated view, which is that our concepts are essentially finite things that are trying to grasp an infinitely complex reality that is always changing on different timescales, right? And therefore, it is unavoidable that any concept will be incomplete, and even if almost complete, will eventually become obsolete due to historical change, and therefore our concepts must evolve with our practice, and our practice evolves with our new concepts, and that's a very dialectical point of view that, let's say, entirely missing, I think, in some of the ordinary language philosophy of the 20th century.
Yeah, I also think a good habit that dialectical thinkers and the people of the Marxist tradition have that is sometimes missing from science is this centrality of conflict in dynamics, right? A lot of things that people develop I think are almost trying to avoid that kind of things like that. But I think that the centering of conflict is pretty fundamental to like dialectical materialism in terms of like it's the tensions, it's the conflicts, and it's the those kinds of things that really drive any system, I guess.
Yeah, totally. It's very deep philosophically. I am I really like Hegel. Sadly, I don't really fully understand him, and maybe he didn't fully understand himself. But Hegel is full of these incredible,
Hello.
surprising insights philosophically. And one of the things I did work on was analyzing the calculus from the point of view of real contradiction. And there's a talk online where I delve into that. And I think it's a very important insight that I think is true, that was said by Marx and Engels and by Hegelians before them, that change, all kinds of change and motion, ultimately arises from real contradictions. And I think you can see that in the logic of the calculus. So it's very rich and it goes very deep, I think.
Yeah, I guess the whole notion of like an infinitesimal that like led to that development is I still haven't listened to that talk that you gave. I think you're talking about the one that had like Hegelian contradiction in the real numbers or something like that. But yeah, I mean, the development of formal mathematics as it exists today, like modern mathematics, or at least modern calculus, is and real analysis definitely arises from that. You know, the contradictory nature of like just an infinitesimal. On the one hand, it's infinitely close to zero. On the other hand, it's not zero, right? Something like So the formulation of sequential kinds of definitions of a limit and things to get to kind of explore that is what drove the whole development. So
Yeah, I mean, yes, the notion of the limit in the calculus and how it's used is super interesting from a philosophical point of view. But let's not get into it now. I think the talk I gave on this was called "Motion as Contradiction: Zeno, Hegel, and the Calculus." And so, if anyone's interested in that, it dives into that subject.
I'll link it in chat for those interested.
I would like to ask about people's projects on the call, what they're working on and what they're interested in, and any particular problems they're trying to solve or resolve. I'd be interested to know what you're all doing.
Leon is always doing stuff. He's got a whole manifesto that he's working on.
Yeah, I'll let you go first, Alex, while I look for that video.
Yeah. So me, I I still am at the. I still feel like I'm just constantly like learning still. I feel like I'm much better at just like uh I've been taking a lot of I've been trying to go through kind of all of uh the the presentations of value theory as currently I'm reading Romer, uh and just kind of trying to compile and synthesize just all the different strains of value theory over the years, and like the single system people or whatever, the people like Richard Wolff and Duncan Foley. I'm still just kind of I'm just trying to go through all of that. I think at some point I might make a pretty detailed like series of videos on YouTube, like just going like maybe like a kind of a class on like formal presentations of value theory that eventually gets into econophysics and the Farjuna-Macover stuff as well, which I do think is the future of that stuff. And then also, I made those YouTube videos on specifically like the stuff on the reproduction schema, and I've been sort of over the last 2 summers been trying to turn that into a paper of some sort, just to say that I have something to show for myself, even though it's mostly just kind of refining things that I already did. So I feel like there's just so much stuff like that to do that I haven't had a lot of time between my job and that to like work on a particular topic or work on a particular question to answer. Half because I don't have time, and half because I mostly am still working through all of the existing literature on the things that I'm interested in. Um, but yeah, that's kind of I'm working on that paper to based on my YouTube videos, and just kind of taking my own notes on things and thinking kind of a little bit about making some kind of YouTube class on the mathematics behind all this.
Yeah.
That sounds great. It sounds like you're taking the same trajectory I took probably about 20 years ago.
Really?
Yeah. So I think it's very useful. And I also do think that value theory is important, because if you randomly pick anyone educated in the world and ask them about Marx's theory of value, you would get a pretty negative opinion of it. And I do think it's important for Marxism and for the historical project to completely modernize and strengthen Marx's theory of value. So I think it's
Yeah.
very worthwhile work.
I guess that's kind of what drives me, is that I still don't think that there's any hope of abolishing money or abolishing, and I mean that in like the sense of, moving past it to something, to a new system that is still scientific, but also, allows, it's still scientific in terms of if it's quantifying, useful for, coordinating an economy. I don't think without reckoning with value theory. I think that that's the only way to get past that. I think there needs to be a direct, not because I think there needs to be some kind of micro theory of prices in terms of values. Although I think you've done a lot of really great work on explaining where the disparities exactly lie between Marx's technical notion of values and prices, and actual prices. But also because I think that we have to figure out what is the coordinating purpose. What role in terms of coordination are prices serving, and how do we replace that with something that won't have the same problems as money? And I think labor time accounting of some sort is going to be absolutely necessary. Um, so yeah, I think that's what kind of drives me with respect to all of my value theory stuff and keeps me kind of stuck on it, is that I just don't think that there's any kind of hope of getting away from money without like working through that.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. Um, Money is incredible technology, and
Mm-hmm.
it caused an enormous flowering of human culture, a flourishing. It
Mm-hmm.
was incredibly progressive. The invention of money, and and we've lived with it for millennia. So as I mentioned earlier, there's not everything we inherit is irrational. There's a great deal of rationality in self-organization of human society through money. So if we want to overcome it, we better make damn sure that we understand it first.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the other point, though, is that in terms of priorities of problems to solve, I don't think the root of all evil is money. I think the root of all current evil is capital, which is a particular way of using money. It's a particular way of using money.
I think the way that capital uses money is that money serves to sort of anonymize or obfuscate kind of who specifically, like, where exploitation is coming from, right? A lot of direct it's a means by which a lot of, like, direct oppression is made indirect and impossible to discern, like, where it's coming from. Like, it makes oppression into a systemic force a lot of the time, that just kind of feels like it's coming at you from nowhere, rather than giving you, there's your oppressor, he's right there. It's like money kind of covers that up. I think that's I think a transmotive production role. Like, I think that was the case in ancient Rome too and stuff. But
it certainly does that. On the other side of the coin, it also binds individuals together into a functioning whole that is partly self-organizing and adaptive. And it allows people to essentially exchange their time over huge spaces and across time. So there is something incredibly functional and useful in what it does also. So as usual, it's a mixed bag. It has rationality and irrationality.
Yeah. And honestly, I think Marx did a pretty good job at, like, kind of pointing out the specific aspects of money that have the adverse effects. In particular, it's the fact that it circulates, the fact that it can be hoarded. These aspects of money are what allow for, the accumulation of social power, right? That's the problematic aspect of money that needs to be moved past. And I think Marx correctly diagnosed that. I also forgot to mention, like, I am working at, the school I teach at. I have a colleague there that actually is into some of this stuff coincidentally as well, and we're doing some, like, we're trying to move towards doing some, like, agent-based modeling of, like, a labor time economy with some of our students, although it's going pretty slowly, and it's more his project than mine, but it's based on the work of the GIC. I can't remember what it's like Fundamental Principles of Communist Production Organization. Yeah. I read that whole book. It's got some interesting things in it, but he's involved with that, like, EDA project in Germany, and he wants to do some modeling based on their project and their implementation of that, and I'm helping with that too. So.
Yeah, very good stuff. So I guess what I'm working on, what am I not working on? I am a group member of INDEP, the International Network for Democratic Economic Planning. I work with the content and events groups, events and outreach. So we do things like host events, which are then uploaded to YouTube. And we also just do a lot of outreach and just, making sure people are aware of what everyone is doing in this burgeoning space of, prefigurative, experimental, etc. post-capitalism. And so I work with them. You'll see me post our events in this server sometimes. I need to do it more often. But yeah, so I'm working with INDEP, founding member of that. I'm also a third-year grad student doing physics. So that's what's eating my time right now. I've got a lot of teaching obligations. I've got a class with 88 students that was listed on our campus software as both in-person and asynchronous because reasons. So I'm dealing with that. But yeah, aside from those things, my passion project that I'm working on personally is this, and you can find it in the writing projects channel here in the server. My working title for it is Post-Capitalism, a Programmatic Minimum. The idea here is basically identify which specific interventions, processes, and institutions can be used to realize post-capitalist social outcomes. So, for instance, the building blocks that I kind of identified and taught and building up are this essay that I did that I turned into the presentation I gave at the in-depth conference in Montreal in July. This idea of socialized and observables, basically learning to see and meet human needs in a post-capitalist world. And that goes into the sort of, you could say, a dialectic process of developing measurement processes, schemas, etc., that, where changes in values in those dimensions of measurement correspond to changes in the satisfaction state of our material goals. And then I go through in-kind accounting, I develop a notion of a library of industry, which serves probably one of the most central institutions for post-capitalist planning and distribution, at least of the basics sector. You're always going to have a basic sector, you'll always have a planned sector, an unplanned sector, and an external sector, and this covers the mechanics of the planned sector and distribution. With that, it includes labor time credits and labor draft time pledges. Those are the equivalents of credits and debts. And then you have production forecasting and recommendations, public resource libraries, which are the physical. So the library of industry really acts like Wikipedia on crack. It captures all the knowledge that we have of how things are produced, how to maintain things, what you can do with stuff, etc. And if you want to look up OpenLCA, that is a program that Walter Zoig is working on in Germany. Very promising program that really allows us to capture a lot of that knowledge. I think it's really impressive. I think that's one of the biggest things that came out of the conference was like, oh shit, this is already here.
Yeah, I still need to email Walter, and like that's the thing I really want to get more involved in doing. I want to get access to that
and
sort of software.
It stands for lifecycle assessment. So open lifecycle assessment, and
he has this S after the C, lifecycle sustainability assessment, is I think.
Right. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, you have that as an integral of cybernetic democratic economic planning. That's kind of his pet project, and I think it ties in well to my work. And the role in which it plays is that of a library of industry, basically. Then you have the labor draft, which is used for labor time planning in the plan sector, and then you have committee of congresses, which are which is the controlling layer of society, where you have the atomic units of legislative supremacy are held at the level of just towns and communities and all that, just regular people filling different roles to pursue different material goals that are, and these goals exist in a dynamic priority heuristic that has to be able to respond to changes in material conditions, and it's on us to democratically decide that, and so you have to think about what processes can allow that to happen, and so that's the idea behind the committee of congresses, is to instantize what I call real democratic control over society. And the administrative entities within which these are that these act within are territorial planning complexes, and then I talk a bit about making the information age useful. Reimagining ways to use our information technologies, and then the physical infrastructure. We have to have an infrastructure that supports everything else here. You need a legal system that makes sense for post-capitalism. You need a reimagining of intelligence and defense, and you need to totally overhaul your education system. And then the last chapter is like where I put my perhaps more off the wall ideas, and this kind of leads me to what I wanted to talk about with you in particular, Ian, which is an extension to your work that I've kind of been working on, which is basically, so my fiance and I watch wrestling, WWE, and I realized that there is a very deep analogical connection between the phenomenology of kayfabe in wrestling and politics and the phenomenology of magic and explicit magic in a magic show versus occulted magic in religion. And so the analogy is simply that WWE is to politics what a magic show is to religion. And so the key there is kayfabe, which is like a reality-driven fantasy. And you have within a WWE show, you have all these roles and these rules which advance a certain story. And the rules, the kayfabe rules, kind of govern how the characters act. And they don't act rationally relative to their nominal goals. They act at the whims of whatever like they remember things when it's convenient for the plot. They forget things when it's convenient for the plot. There's always only just the right number of people vying for a belt for it to make sense from a storytelling perspective, rather than from a rationality perspective of everyone wants the gold, right? You've got personal rivalries, you've got lesser belts, and all that, and the characters just kind of go from storyline to storyline as the story writers see fit, and that is a part of it. And you're looking in on a fantasticalized version of conflict, of warfare. And now let's examine some of the elements of this. You have the wrestlers in ring who are all friends with each other backstage and off the show, but in ring they have these like scripted rivalries and so forth. And you have the commentators, and there's always a face commentator and a heel commentator, and the commentator's job is to deliver to the audience, quote unquote, what is happening in terms of this kayfabe universe. Like, oh wow, that character is out cold, and then they get up 5 seconds later, and then they just don't acknowledge the fact that they were wrong, or they kind of re-rationalize it to keep the train of the storytelling going. They're kind of reacting to what's happening in the ring and interpreting that in terms of the kayfabe of the universe and delivering that to the audience. And so in wrestling, it's all explicit. We know we're being shown a fantastic spectacle of war, whereas in politics, there is an occulted spectacle of war, in the sense that, like in the U.S. and in other parliamentary, boils down really to the party in control and the party not in control, or the coalitions that are either in control or not in control. And these warring factions are presented by the media, which act as the commentators in this case. The red team is presented as face to the red team fans, and blue team is presented as heel to the red team fans, and vice versa with the blue team announcer. And this creates a sort of dual kayfabe where there are different rules of conduct and a different interpretation, and like there a real disagreement on what is happening in Congress, in power, in Parliament, and whatever the case is. And it's an occulted kayfabe because as soon as you realize that like the rules of how Congress conducts itself, the rules of how Parliament conducts itself, these are totally contingent, and whether the rules apply only makes sense. Like it is governed by these external factors. So like for instance, the filibuster is this thing in Congress where you can sit up there for as long as you want and on and force everyone else to stay in the room and listen to you. And sometimes that is allowed, and sometimes they decide to disallow that. Or, for instance, if you need supermajority to pass a bill, that goes back and forth between 50% and 60%, as according to the whims of the parties in control. Like when Democrats are in control, they need 60% to pass a bill. When Republicans are in control, it's 50%. Or like who gets to sit on the Ways and Means Committee, or what powers the committees have. These are all kayfabe rules that apply sometimes and don't apply sometimes. And as rule of law breaks down, you get more and more of this phenomenon where you have a decoupling between what the rules nominally are and what the rules effectively are. So there's that dimension of it in politics, but then there's also a further dimension that I've realized, which is this generalizes to warfare in a very general sense. So let me give you a few examples there. So up until roughly 2022 or so, Zelensky was presented to Western audiences as a heel character. He's the most corrupt president in Europe. How dare he? They tried to impeach Trump twice because of his corruption with Zelensky. But as soon as Russia invaded Ukraine, bam, they flipped him to face. And he's been the darling sweetheart of the media ever since. Opposite example would be Saddam Hussein, who was the U.S.'s ally during the Iraq-Iran war back in the 1980s, and then when he tried to nationalize oil, bam, the media flipped him to a heel character, and that justified any violence against him. And that's one thing that it's kind of spooky to notice. It's like at the end of the day, the characters in the ring are doing the same stuff to each other. Doesn't matter if they're face or a heel. All that governs is whether the crowd cheers or boos. Or in the case of the sort of occulted dual kayfabe, it controls which faction cheers and which faction boos, and pits these factions against one another. In a sort of divide and conquer strategy. But another example that I found really fascinating was how the 12-day Iran-Israel war played out in June. Had these escalations, which from a rational standpoint are inevitable. You have, Israel wants to create this Greater Israel project and take over like 8 countries worth of turf. And they're trying to antagonize and overthrow the Iranian regime as a result of that. They've been trying this for decades and decades now. And this time they finally roped the U.S. in and had them bomb Iran. But the U.S. knows through their war simulations that they've done over the last couple decades that invading Iran is impossible, a non-starter. Their big boats get routed by little skiffs in their simulations because of the shallow waters and the narrow mountain passes near the coast of Iran. So there's no sea invasion to be had. There's no land invasion to be had. You can't bomb a country as big as Iran out of existence. So to the U.S., it doesn't make sense to get involved in that war. But, so what happened here? The Trump administration was in a bind. They basically, I'm pretty sure they were in a corner where it's like you either bomb Iran and drag the to a bigger version of the Iraq war and crash the empire completely, or you just, the Israeli intelligence agencies will publish some dirt on your ass. The way that the administration wiggled out of that situation is with heavy use of kayfabe. And what I mean by that is basically the U.S. bombed, and by the way, Iran doesn't want to fight the U.S. either because they know it's a situation if they do that. So what happened was the U.S. did bomb Iran. They bombed Fordow, Esfahan, and what was the third one? I always forget what the third one is. But they bombed these 3 nuclear facilities. But the nuclear facilities had been evacuated months prior because the Iranians knew that the U.S. was probably going to attack them at some point. So the U.S. did this symbolic bombing of Iran and said, "Okay, we have completed our obligation to our partners in Tel Aviv, and now we're just going to declare victory and go home." And the Iranians, in response, because they had to placate their population, they said, "Okay, we're going to do a ceremonial bombing of a U.S. air Qatar." And they sent like 13 rockets towards Doha, and 1 rocket landed, and the base was evacuated beforehand, and everyone involved knew it was going to happen. Like there were these back channels of communication where they all knew what was going to happen, and so this mutual bombing was then used both by the Americans and the Iranians to declare victory, declare the battle done, and go home. And that allowed these empires to step down the ladder rung of wartime escalation, counter to the rational, logical endpoint of nuclear conflagration. So kayfabe is used to kind of, blur the lines between reality and fantasy, and it's used heavily in warfare, and I think it makes a good phenomenology of the spectacle of war. So I've been droning on for a little bit. Sorry for that, but I just wanted to like lay that out and get your take on it and see what you think and so forth.
Yeah, there's 2 things I want to say. Because you said 2 things. The first was about all your work in planning, and the second was the analogy with I don't know the word kayfabe. It means
Kayfabe.
Kayfabe. It means people consciously participating in a fiction. Is that what it is?
Yeah, and it can be conscious or unconscious, in the sense that
Right.
Kayfabe is
Gotcha.
in the case of a wrestling ring, it's made explicit, like in a magic show, and in the case of politics, it's occulted. And people are genuinely convinced that they're actually doing these things.
Yeah, so when you made that analogy, it immediately rang true, because there's a great deal of theatre and fiction about what's presented in the media spectacle to us ordinary people, and it doesn't really make sense, and it's contradictory, and they change who are the bad guys from week to week. Definitely the case. But obviously, the deeper thing there is that obviously there are some actors, political actors, who are consciously shaping a narrative, and to give apparent reasons that obscure the real reasons. And one thing we should at least take comfort from, although it's not much comfort, is that at least these other human beings are trying to still give reasons. And that is a sliver of hope. They may be concocted reasons, they may be bad reasons, but they're trying to give reasons. And that at least reveals the fact that we still live in a society where actions should have some justification. Things will have totally broken down when these kind of people don't even bother to give reasons. We might be getting there, I don't know. And then deeper than that,
we're definitely there in the U.S. Like if you follow what's happening.
No, I don't think we're quite there. Indonesia is there, Lebanon is there. There's certain countries that I think the states are collapsing because of the lack of that. But it's kind of creeping into. Yeah, that's interesting though. The lack of at least it's kind of dark that at least there's like some social mandate that is required for politics. Like still, the fact that's even seems like it might not be there forever is crazy. But yeah.
Yeah, another thing though. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the deeper thing is that the people who are crafting these reasons, which may obscure the real reasons, are themselves are not the arch manipulators who are free to just make things up, because they themselves are subject to the rationality, overarching rationality of capitalism, imperialism, and capital accumulation. So they are, although they don't realize it, they're actually dancing to something else's tune, and that something else again is capital, is this super individual entity. This is what they are subservient to, even if they don't realize it. And they're also subject to those coercive forces, albeit they usually get a much better time of it than ordinary people do. So they're also being having the wool pulled over their eyes. They are unconsciously following the dictates of a social system that is ultimately has deep aspects of irrationality. I mean, the mere fact that there is a reasonably clear left and right wing in capitalist society is because of the socialization of production, where there are two functional sources of income, wages and profits, and that eventually manifests as all in a distorted and sometimes tenuous way as warring left and right factions in society. This is produced by the fundamental structure of capitalism. And then just briefly, the first thing you said about planning, it sounds like incredibly worthwhile and important work. There is one opinion I have, though, that I want to share, and make of it what you will, but I honestly think it is a missed opportunity to work on socialist planning divorced from the theory of the Revolutionary Party. And what I mean by that is that I think it's a missed opportunity to view planning as something that can be practiced and put into practice post-capitalism, post the revolution. I would love to see ideas of new kinds of social organization, new kinds of ways of producing collectively, to be integrated with the theory of the party and the theory of the revolution. In other words, would love to see the ability for communists to build intentional economic communities in the here and now, which actually instantiate some of these planning ideas, these new organizational ideas, in order to accumulate means of production at the expense of the capitalist sector and grow. Because one of the biggest problems with the theory of the party, as far as I am aware of it, understand it today, is that there is a complete lack of a theory of how to acquire material power and material wealth.
So I actually touched on that so the chapters that I listed are the main body of text, but I've got one chapter at the end where I put a bunch of musings on this exact question, because that is the question. How did we get there from where we are?
I think we're all on the same page there in terms of that, the necessity of, we're not just, talking about, top-down administrative, not even top-down, but like post-revolutionary planning, but we need forms of social organizational planning that can spread and take over, like not just.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Yeah. That sounds brilliant.
You can see this on page 69 onwards and then after that point, it's just blurbs that I've not developed fully yet or sorted into the main body. It's a work in progress. But yeah, there's like 2 chapters fully developed. Maybe like one that's 95% developed and one that's maybe 80% developed. Those are the ones on socialized and observables, and one on the one on public resource libraries. And then the others are a little more terse because they're still stubs. But yeah.
Is there a link to that in the Econophysics channel?
Yeah, I'll send it in the Yeah, I just sent my most recent version in the writing projects channel under the Learning Hall section. And I'll also copy the message link into the chat for the voice channel here. And I send this whenever I push an update, just to get continual feedback and so forth.
Great.
Yeah, and then we also, in addition to all this stuff that I'm doing, we also talk with like Thomas Hardin a lot. He meets every 3 weeks on Jitsi, and that's really productive. We sometimes talk with Spiros Samothrakis and David Zachariah when they are able to come around. And Dave is working on a draft of a text that I think is going to be really important and consequential, which is basically going back and responding to some of the steelman arguments that the Austrians have made against planning. Because we all are familiar with like the notion of the economic calculation problem from the perspective of, oh, can we solve this linear programming problem? Yes, we can. Easy peasy. We do it. We've done it. But there are some more difficult questions that have been brought up that haven't been fully theorized in the English literature, but that has been theorized pretty heavily in Hungarian and Russian literature, Soviet literature in particular. So when that comes out, I think it's going to be a really good read.
Yeah. I will say, I think while there are a lot of like, you do see a lot of people arguing those like anti-planning things on like, toxic hellscape social media places like Twitter. I do think that like planning as as a necessity is inevitably winning the argument. Like, I think that increasingly, for a bunch of different reasons, like it's going to seem very obvious that planning is necessary, like on like the very near term, like both because this crazy belief in AI, or like the repeated failures of free market mechanisms to give us safe airlines or safe drinking water, or just like basic things that markets are failing at right now. I'm pretty sure. I feel like those arguments are gonna look so antiquated soon, honestly.
Yeah, that sounds all very interesting. I have a great admiration for Dave Zachariah's work, and I have a lot of confidence in him. So I think anything he does will be very, very high quality and worth reading for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And I guess I wanted to return the question to you. You mentioned a draft that's like upwards of 400 pages. What's the progress on that? Like, do you know roughly how long it's going to be, or what, if roughly how long it'll be until it's ready for public eyes and so forth?
Yeah, it's a pretty ambitious book project, and I've been working on it now, I think, for about 1.5 years. But of course, I've really been working on it for decades. It's just bringing together a lot of stuff and some new stuff. And it would be exclusively focused on the theory of economic value. And as I mentioned, I think before we started recording, it's it's a very long preamble. It's the scientific basis for a subsequent work that will return to the capital as a real God themes, and to give that a more robust and comprehensive theoretical foundation. So, yeah, I'm working through a lot of economic modeling. I'm bringing in control theory, theories of natural intentionality, and I feel like I am completely working in the tradition of Marxism, but I will have some new things to say about the theory of value, which I feel that Marx pointed to but didn't fully explicate. So I expect the first draft probably to be ready middle of next year. That's a reasonable time frame, I think. At which point I will start giving out early versions for feedback and start looking for a publisher. That's my plan.
I would love to be on the short list to see that draft. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I mean that's crazy close considering you said you've been working on it for, was it over a decade?
Yeah, it's all coming together. It's something I should have really started a long time ago and knuckled down to doing. But life is such as it is that things get in the way. But I'm really making good progress on it now, and I'm very excited about it. It will be a technical book, unfortunately. I will try and make it as accessible as possible. I think people on this call will have no problems with it. But in terms of a general readership, I think that is asking a lot, even with the best intentions to make it as accessible as possible. It will be a technical book for sure.
I think it should be technical first, and then you can leave it to people like us to try to popularize it.
Yeah, that it's technical just makes me more excited.
As long as you do the hard part,
Yeah.
But yeah,
So,
that makes me more excited for it, to be honest.
Okay, great. So right now, I'm working on a chapter on joint production, and it's going very well. And I want to hit all the points where people in the past have said Marx's theory of value is broken or impossible for various reasons. Joint production being one, heterogeneous labor being another. The transformation problem being a third. All the usual suspects I'm hitting and showing that these problems can be actually quite easily resolved with the right conceptual approach. And there's lots of diagrams, there's lots of scientific visualizations, and so I'm hoping it will be quite a definitive work. But I am the author, so I would say that. So we'll see.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to it, man. That sounds amazing. There's a lot of yeah. Go ahead.
With the joint production thing, like I recently finally got around to like fully working through like Morishima's proposed fix to the joint production problem, especially in like the book he wrote later than Marx's Economics, Value, Exploitation, and Growth, where he actually like changes his mind about whether labor share value should be abandoned. His linear programming solution, it seems pretty reasonable. You made a fair point about it being that the original conception of it was not a minimum but rather an average. That said, I'm pretty sure, I haven't fully worked through this, but I'm pretty sure that his linear programming generalization is a generalization. Like the values that it returns do line up with the values that you would get in the classical system. So I'm curious, like, what you think of that, and also like what your solution is, like what you're pitching that's different. Do you think that's reasonable to talk about here? Or?
Yeah, we can talk about it briefly. So there's a section of my book where I will go through all the previous solutions to joint production. Obviously, it's not fully written yet, but I'm aware of most of them. And I will need to get Morishima's later work, especially if you say that he altered his theoretical approach to joint production to the ones I have read. So we'll see.
Yeah,
but as far as I know, as far as I know, Morishima's approach is a minimization solution that, as far as I know, and I may be wrong, loses some nice properties of what labor values should satisfy. In particular, I think additivity. So if you have a bundle of commodities and you measure their value, and then you say just increase one of the components of that bundle by a small amount and measure its value, you would expect the second measure to be greater than the previous measure. And I don't think Morishima's approach satisfies that criteria.
It doesn't, but he does also make a pretty compelling argument that values actually aren't additive in reality when you generalize this much. And his argument for why is because, you know, the embodied labor, like if you have two commodities that you want to produce individually, then the net labor time necessary to produce them might be different than if you want to produce both, because if you want to produce both at once, then there might be a third production process that is that does produce both, that is different than the other individual production processes. So that therefore, you know, it's not additive because of that specifically. Like the best process for producing like one of A and one of B together might be different than the best process for producing either A or B individually. And so
Yeah, so I think he's gone. I think he's gone wrong there, because best or worst is irrelevant. There is the current totality of the conditions of production. It's a given. It may involve multiple competing processes that are joint production processes that produce subsets of the same commodities. Doesn't matter. It's just there is all the firms producing as they do, using the techniques that they do. Then the question is, what is the value of commodities now, given this state of affairs, given the conditions of production? Counterfactuals like what is the best or worst or most efficient is actually irrelevant.
well, I mean, what's socially necessary, right? That's what we want to talk about. Like, what is the socially necessary amount of labor? Which
Right,
isn't,
which
you're
is
right. That's not best or worst. It's not
it's the
average though
average.
either, really.
It's the
Is
average.
it?
Well, it's average in quotation marks. It's the collective outcome of all those production processes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
some will be quite inefficient, some will be very efficient. It doesn't matter. Just given what the technology is at the moment, what are the conditions of production, what's the current values of commodities. It's no good to say, well, this particular technology, this particular firm is very inefficient, so we'll optimize it away. That's not what labor values are supposed to measure, in my opinion.
Hmm. Regardless, I do think if you haven't specifically looked at the book Value, Exploitation, and Growth, um, I think that it's definitely, if you're working on joint production, worth reading the specific chapter where
Yes,
where he
I'll have
responds to Steedman. Really, is what it is. Is he has a very long chapter explaining what is wrong with Steedman's presentation and what he's missing. Which is,
I'll have to read it, of course. I'll have to do that indeed. So yeah, my approach is different to Morishima's in the sense that I don't introduce counterfactuals. I just look at the factual state of affairs and answer the question, what are the values of commodities?
gotcha.
But anyway, yes, that's quite a technical issue, and I'm right in the midst of it. I won't get into the technical details now. It's too complicated, but I do intend to produce a talk on YouTube explaining it by the end of the year. So maybe we can return to this topic when I've done that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah,
What about Oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead. No,
I was
I
gonna
had
ask,
nothing. I was just
I
gonna
was gonna
say,
shift
yeah,
to the other kind of hot topic, which is the heterogeneity of labor. That one I haven't really still seen compelling arguments why it's even honestly a problem in terms of, like, you know, logical inconsistency of a theory. I haven't really I haven't I maybe I haven't understood it, but like, you know, the model that Morishima lays out at the end of that book, his problem with it is that you could have differing rates of exploitation depending on the uh, uh, you know, depending on the group of laborers, and it's like, to me that just seems like, well, yeah, that should be expected to happen. Like the individual rate of exploitation of, you know, this or that social group might be different than the overall rate for the working class. So I wasn't sure what he was getting at personally, but
Yeah, that sounds kind of right. So there's a YouTube video I created. It's called Price Value Dynamics with Heterogeneous Labor. and so I go into it there. I think it's quite accessible. So if you're interested, you could watch that.
Oh, he's talking. He's talking to you, Ian. That you're just both.
I'm
British.
sorry, I didn't quite catch that. What was that?
You both have British accents. That's what he said.
The question was. Yeah, no, I don't think unlearning economics is all on the up and up with this stuff all that much. There have been back and forths, and they haven't gone well.
Well, I think this was. I hope I enjoyed this discussion. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for bringing me out of my my cave to talk. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming out, and I've wanted to now for time, and it's been just ideas percolating in my mind and figuring out like some avenues of discussion. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where you go with your work. I'd totally be down to do this again. Just let me know. I'm gonna be showing up here in the Econophysics server in the voice channel on a weekly basis just to shoot the shit with whoever wants to show up. So if you want to come out to one of those, and we'll go on a deep dive on some other topic. There's plenty of stuff we didn't even get to today, like computability and all that stuff. I think that's a really fun rabbit hole to go down. But yeah, no.
Yeah, so I have to focus completely on the book, otherwise it'll never get finished. But occasionally I'd be happy to chat about stuff, and so the computability issues, I think I could learn from others on this call, and I would actually really love to talk about that at some point. So maybe we can pencil that in for the future.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah, definitely, and we'll get Jules in here too. The guy with like the on Twitter. He would, Alex and I and he had a discussion a year and a half, 2 years ago, but I lost the recording. So it would be great to run that back, and then also have you in the room, because I invited you to that as well, but you could.
I'll be honest.
At the time,
I barely even remember that discussion taking place. Like, I'm not even sure. Like, I'm not sure I can remember it.
We talked about dialectics and computability, go to witness theorem. We talked about my generalization to the notion class is in terms of like permission structures, effective permission structures.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, it was a good one, but man, I lost the. But I'm not going to lose the recording from this time. So as soon as we're done here, I'll download those and I'll give them. I'll send them to both of you to edit and upload however you see fit. And I'll probably upload it as well. Just have that redundancy. But yeah, let's get that conversation out there. And yeah, thanks for coming out, everyone. It's been great. It's been back to back. We've been going since 1 p.m. Eastern. It's now 5:30 p.m. Eastern. I'm sure it's getting late for you too, Ian. So we don't want to keep you up too late.
Well, that's stamina. That's the marathon. Well done.
Yes.
All right, thanks everyone.
I've always had. Yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks everyone for being here. We'll see you in the next one. Peace out.
Bye.
Yeah, see ya.